Good Wednesday evening, everyone. You are watching Direct Line of Live. Our special guest tonight is Ethan Gutmann, China expert. We'll be covering the Chinese, the real China elections, I should say. The Taiwanese elections that were just this past weekend. And our hosts tonight are Jackie Saxon and Mark Unker. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Dwight. He's still waking up today, I guess. New year, new light, right? Ethan, thank you so much for joining us. I get to play the curious child here because this is definitely out of my depth of understanding. I've read up a little bit, but I think my first question that I'm curious about is the Progressive Party leader is the one who won, I believe it was re-election, right, for the presidency. Does that term mean the same thing that it does in the United States? Is this somebody who's very much like a liberal?
No, it's a really... Let me put it to you in conservative terms. Is that okay if we just talk that way? Okay. You know, I would be a kind of a KMT guy. That's the blues. You're talking about the Greens. The Greens have just won re-election. You know, the former president has stepped down, but you've got a new leader. But there is one major problem with the KMT, with the blues, and that is that they are mostly from China, from the mainland. And their tendency is to want to make a deal with China. That's what everybody worries about, okay? Is that, you know, they'll sort of go, well, one country, two systems didn't work out that well for Hong Kong, but maybe it'll work for us or something. I don't know. We don't know exactly what kind of deal they would make. But I can tell you this, they are seen as squishy on the Chinese Communist Party, okay, at this point. They used to be the hawks, okay? And from a kind of a cultural perspective, I guess many of us would be kind of more oriented towards the KMT, except for this one major factor. The DPP has fought the fight for Taiwan independence to the point where they're even saying, look, we don't have to declare independence. We are independent. All right. All this nonsense about one country and, you know, and who is China. That's not reflective of anything anymore. We are a country. We've made our own laws. We have very fair elections. We're a democratic state. That's it. End of story. KMT is still, to some extent, because they were the people who came in who had power from the Nationalist Party and they fled China. They still had designs for many years to take back China. The DPP does not. The DPP we're Taiwanese at this point. That's who we are. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, and then there's a third party to complicate everything, which is this People's Party, the Taiwan People's Party. And they're the whites, if you like. That's the color schemes are interesting here. And that one's really scary. They're genuinely scary. I mean, the KMT is not scary. The KMT brings something else to the table that the DPP does not. They have a great relationship with the military. Okay. And the problem with the DPP is not that they don't have the will to defend Taiwan, but they do not have the relationships within the military to do it. They are not comfortable talking to the military. They're not comfortable working with the military, especially the army. And that's a big problem in Taiwan. And that's a big problem for the United States, because we are going to get swept into that war if China, you know, decides to actually pull the trigger.
Right.
Now, that's a whole different question. That's a whole different question. We can certainly get into that. We all have opinions on it. It's a crystal ball. We can see anything we like in it. Okay.
So to put a bow on that, what you're saying is the president that they elected is not the best for the Taiwanese liberation movement, right?
No, I'm saying that he is the best. He is definitely they elected the right party if Taiwan's to stay independent from China and is not going to make a deal right now. And Taiwan right now is I want to tell you something. We should start off just putting this in a little context. We were talking about India versus China just before the show started, and the one thing you should know about Taiwan is that per capita, they are now the wealthiest country in Asia. They beat Japan while I was there last year. Okay. I think it was right around this time of year that we sort of got the news that they have actually, per capita, they're wealthier than any other society there. That beats South Korea, beats Japan. That is unbelievable. Okay. I don't know about Singapore. I mean, I'm not sure about Singapore, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, probably Singapore.
You think that's from the processors?
Yeah. Now, most of the people in Taiwan don't actually see that money. Okay. So they don't feel like they're wealthy at all. But it's there. Okay. This is an economic miracle that they have pulled off. Everyone in the world is dependent on these processors. Okay. On these chips, these little chips. And for some reason, nobody can duplicate them. We've tried in America. China's tried. It's an art, okay? It's an art, and you can't replicate it somehow. It's the weirdest thing. I'm not, you got to go talk to the lab coat guys about why that is. I can't go any further than that tonight, okay? But
Ethan, you talked about it, and it does seem something of a paradox that the party that seems to be the strongest in maintaining a independent identity, let's put it that way, also has at the same time the weakest relationship with the military, which I assume is a legacy of the KMT's hold on the military.
And the fact that riots, when they were trying to go democratic, the DPP was seen as a kind of revolutionary organization, and they were shot like partridges at a couple of points, okay, in demonstrations. And that's very hard to get passed for a lot of DPP members, and it's not so easy for the military either. That is a legacy problem, which nobody knows how to deal with. But this is what is interesting. You caught on to it, that this is the weird enigma about this election. What happened now, though, is, when you're being threatened like this, it really pulls people together. And unlike past elections, where there's been immediate recriminations and, we need a recount and, this is somehow unfair, that did not happen. Okay. Just a few days ago, when the concession speeches came out, they were very gracious. Okay. They were, the acceptance speech was very gracious. So, I mean, we are really looking at a kind of a new Taiwan culture. That does not go for that other party, the People's Party. Though. Well, I'll get to that at some point.
So why don't we go there too? Well,
wait, before you get to that, I have a serious, half serious question. Do they have mail-in ballots in Taiwan?
No, that's another thing that is going on here. I mean, actually, they're an inspiration to America because they count votes like we used to, but they even do it better. Okay, there's a clip going around on the internet, and apparently it made it over to mainland China. And the clip shows these people counting the votes. And what they do is they have a couple of people who are controllers, okay? Maybe from different parties, maybe not. I don't know about that. I'm not there with a clipboard. But they're sort of these controllers. And then what happens is they pull out the vote, somebody says, and they say what it is to this other person. The person shouts it out, okay? As if they were shouting out the special at a restaurant, okay? One vote for, the KMT, and there it is. And then they record it, then they go back and double check it, and that's it. The vote is done. There's the paperwork. Okay, the recording is made, the vote is recorded. That's the end of it. And guess what? It all gets voted, all the returns come in that night. There's none of this 2 weeks to count stuff, okay? Nothing. Okay, you must show up, you must have ID, and then you vote. And believe me, the turnout was incredible.
What a novel concept.
Oh, incredible, yeah, right? Amazing. No, and what's really interesting about this is one of my clearest memories of when I used to live in Beijing was the Bush-Gore election. And I think the American Chamber of Commerce and the embassy decided to hold kind of a gathering, a party that anybody could pretty much go to watch the returns come in, because of course it was morning in Beijing when the returns were coming in. And the Chinese, middle-class Chinese businessmen crammed into this space. I mean, there must have been 2,500 people there in this ballroom. And I gave a speech. I mean, I felt like it was the most important speech of my life, because people were looking at me like, this is so exciting. The hunger you could feel in that room to have a vote, the novelty of it was so incredible. I mean, I remember that Tennessee went for Bush. That's not a screen memory. That happened, right? Tennessee went for Bush that morning. Yes, it did. And everybody went, whoa, right? It was a big deal. But the point is that hunger, we forget that it's there in China, because we don't, they don't allow us to hear from that. And everybody sort of says, oh, no, we're happy under Chinese Communist Party rule. But the truth is, there is that hunger. And they look at Taiwan. And I think that's probably why China's had such a muted reaction. Beijing has been very muted and said very little about all this. And, yes, they, flew some planes around, and they flew a balloon overhead and all that stuff. But they've been doing that regularly anyways. So we don't fully know, but we think that they're playing it down, because the whole thing's incredibly embarrassing to them.
So we were going to talk about the whites, the third party.
Yes. Now the third party, I guess the Lai, that's the green, the DPP, and he got about 40% of the vote, approximately 41%. Ho got about 32%, and K, or KO, I like to just call him Ko because that's the American way. Dr. Ko got 25% of the vote. Now he was threatening. Initially was very popular among State Department circles, because he was seen as the third way. As Americans, we're always looking for the third way, the way that's not colonial, the way that's not communist.
He's the no label guy. He's the Joe Manchin.
Well, Graham Greene wrote about this, the naive, the quiet American, the naive American coming into Vietnam and looking for the third way. Okay, fair enough. We do have a kind of a weakness for that. And Ko looked like he was it, because he wasn't from either party, and he seemed to be somewhere in the middle on many attitudes. There's one problem. He's a Manchurian candidate. He's a doctor, and he performed operations, or he directed operations in Taiwan. Old people who were dying, and he had their organs removed while they were still alive. He did this illegally. Okay. It wasn't illegal at the time exactly. There weren't really laws about it, but he did that. And then once he developed this technique, he took that show on the road. And, he did, to his credit, he did try to get Americans interested in it, because he wrote in English, but he also wrote in Chinese in the Armed Forces Journal. And guess who was interested? So the Chinese picked up on this. And eventually, around the time I first interviewed him, he just a few months before, he'd been invited to give basically the top speech at this conference in China that was all about live organ harvesting and using an ECMO technique, a special medical technique, to preserve the organs. Now, these were people who were harvesting Falun Gong. Maybe they were harvesting some Uyghurs and also some Tibetans and some house Christians at the same time. And the most notorious doctors were in this conference. That took me some time. I didn't even discover that when I wrote my book on that subject, on the organ harvesting subject. But eventually this came to light, or somebody clued me in and sort of said, look at this conference. And this, after that, I came back to Taiwan in exchange for my book coming out in Chinese, and I held the second biggest press conference. I don't know, at the time it was the second biggest press conference in Taiwanese history, denouncing this man, because I said, look, how can they have secrets on him in the mainland. He'd been to the mainland 36 times. Okay, he's really popular. He's the only foreigner at this conference on live organ harvesting. pictures taken with him as the worst doctors in the world, the real Mengeles of China. One guy claims he's done 10,000 extractions. That's people he's killed on the table. This is phenomenal. I mean, so, and then that was exposed, but he is an incredibly popular guy with young people because he kind of has this attitude about China, like it's all going to be okay. All right. We're part of, and he uses this phrase. He says, we're all part of the cross-strait family, one family, just a little strait of water separating us. That's all. We're the same people. It's never going to be a problem. Okay. We just have to, they can handle us with some respect. We'll handle them with respect. That's the rules of the road, and that's it. No, but the fear has always been that they have so much information on him that they can pull any time. And I'm sure he got up to some other things as well. I mean, there's probably, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speculate.
So was the organ harvesting thing well known prior to the election? No.
I mean, mainly because, well, it came up during his first election as mayor to Ke. He was elected mayor of Taipei. But then when he was running for re-election, that's when that was in 2018, and that's when I came back, and that's when I did this press conference. And the reason I did the press conference was I knew that the press was, it is a democracy, but hey, they're a lot like us. I mean, it's controlled. That, the reporters know what they're supposed to report on, what they're not supposed to report on, if they want access. So I knew I could never get my message through, and the only way to do it was to hold a big press conference. And it was very well attended. I mean, there wasn't a single journalist missing from the room. And I was able to get out the key points, was that Ke had facilitated live organ harvesting in China. He taught techniques that were being used on Falun Gong. And by doing that, he'd encouraged these techniques preserve organs, and therefore a Falun Gong practitioner who was worth $100,000, cut up properly, suddenly was worth $500,000. Because of these new techniques. And that was true. So that became an incentive. And he knew it. He's a very smart guy. Okay. And he had basically come close to admitting this in our interview. But I had missed some of the clues along the way. And the joke of it, now the whole final joke is that he thought I was CIA. So that's why he was sort of telling me as much as he did, because he thought I'll give him something to chew on, and then he won't go after me. So he assumed I knew everything about him. I did not know anything about him. So it was a comedy of errors, really. Okay. But either way, he's not a very good man. I mean, this is a man who's never fessed up. I mean, we talked since then, and he sort of said, look, I really respect what you're doing. I respect, everything, blah, blah, blah. We should be kind of friends. And I sort of said we could say that back then, but now with 1 million, maybe 2 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, and they're butchering them for their organs on a regular basis, about 35,000 a year. No, I don't think we can talk that way. I think you have to, everybody gets second chances, especially politicians, but you have to stand up and say, this is where I stand on this issue. And this is what I'm doing about it. You need to join another group. And if you do that, what option do I have but to publicly embrace you, right? I have no other option. I'll do that, but I can't do it otherwise, because you can't continue to run or be a politically viable candidate under these conditions where you're hiding this stuff and denying it, right? So sorry, it's very personal in a way, isn't it?
Sure. So the work that you've done on this topic has made you essentially, I think it's fair to say, persona non grata in mainland China. You're not planning to go back anytime soon, and they're not planning to let you come back in anytime soon. But did your time in Taiwan give you a perspective as to what's going on in China these days?
Yes, it did. I mean, there's two things I'd add, though, just about that. There was
Sure.
He tried to sue me. Dr. Ke tried to sue me and to take me into criminal court. And I must say, I have a lot of respect for the Taiwanese legal system because, I spent some time in their court, and And he lost 3 cases, one after the other. And so at the end, it was like, okay, send in the clowns. We're really done here, okay? All right. But did I learn? Yes, I learned a couple of things that were really of interest. And one of them is one is very disturbing, which is that the Chinese, within the Chinese Communist Party, the upper echelons, they have a belief. Apparently, we're talking about fairly interesting, rational professionals here. But their belief is that the reason why Taiwan won't come to China, won't come back to Mother China, is because 10% of the blood is tainted by Japanese blood. So they're not really Chinese, they're Japanese. And this is a really frightening kind of racial, when you get racial beliefs kind of guiding foreign policy, that's terrifying. Really, that's quite disturbing. And apparently this is serious. And they're also giving you a figure for what would happen if they take Taiwan. They're telling you that 10% of the population will be eliminated or neutralized. Okay? You even have the figure in hand. I mean, the Chinese stick to figures. I mean, especially the Chinese Communist Party does. So I think that's very disturbing. The other thing I learned is that Xi Jinping is apparently an idiot, which I didn't really realize. He's apparently kind of a moron. And that's probably why it's taken him so long to start cleaning house in his own military. I don't know why he didn't do that the minute that Putin discovered that his own military had lied to him, but he took this long. So that's another thing I discovered. And the final thing I discovered is that even though it is the young people who are supporting Ke, you can't fully blame them. I mean, they don't want a war, but apparently if you go into the inner polls, and I can't even say who did this poll, but it's reliable. They're apparently quite ready to fight. So the Taiwanese are surprisingly, I wouldn't say they're well equipped to fight, but they will fight.
They're mentally prepared.
They're mentally prepared. Yeah.
So tying this into, global politics and U.S. politics in particular, I think it's pretty safe to assume that if the Chinese are going to make a move on Taiwan, it would be prior to the 2024 U.S. presidential election if they are thinking that Biden's not going to get reelected. Do you think that that's going to have impact on their timeline? And I know you mentioned before, it
Absolutely.
sounds like we're going to get dragged into this war.
We might. I mean, there's 2 theories out there. One theory is that everybody, look, everything comes down to Afghanistan. Everything. I mean, you cannot overstate how that was read by the Gang of Four. That is North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran. Okay, and Venezuela, who's a junior partner. Okay, right. But this is, and China is calling the shots here. But something interesting has been happening because China did recently kind of push Putin apparently into saying, yeah, I might negotiate at this point. This might not be a bad time to do that. And it is interesting that Iran, right around the time where it was looking like Hezbollah was going to move on the northern front of Israel, they suddenly backed away from it. Okay, and they just shot a few more missiles and made noise. And then the Houthis started. But the Houthi thing is just it's a distraction. And there's some evidence that the Houthis really aren't even controllable at this point. Okay, just even China can't control them, and Iran maybe can't even control them fully. So we don't know fully what's going on, but there is a possibility that the window closed already. That, in other words, a decision was made at the highest levels in Beijing, and they've decided this is not a good time to go. And one sign of that, the evidence for that, is this cleansing of the rocket forces and the Central Military Commission, which is going on in China right now. They fired a lot of people. Now, usually that would be because they're afraid of a rebellion. They don't feel these. But these are people that Xi Jinping hired, okay? They were his people. And the evidence of corruption is so strong. The fact that these missiles, you probably talked about this a little bit, these missiles, turns out were storing water in them, not gasoline. They didn't have the fuel in them, not gasoline, but they didn't have fuel in them. So they weren't ready to go at all. And they didn't even have the right lids. Okay, so the lids couldn't open or close, and they certainly couldn't protect you against blast and fallout if a counterstrike was launched. These are a big deal. This is a very big deal for the Chinese to discover this. It doesn't mean they're a paper tiger, but it does suggest that the level of corruption in the military is at least at the levels that we saw with Putin's army, right? Where they, had sold off the good tires and replaced them with crappy tires, and that's why they got stuck in the mud very quickly in Ukraine, right? So we don't fully know, but there is some signs that they may have decided that this is not the window, this is not the time. But I don't think Biden has been quite as weak. I mean, he's shown some signs of strength, and he finally hits back at the Houthis. Why we only took out a quarter of the targets, I don't know, but okay, it's something. But the bottom line here is that, yes, I agree, there is a problem because there's another window, which is the election. And the feeling is that they do see Biden as weak, and they see this as the window, the time to go. But they may have already made that decision. And that's why I say this is a crystal ball question. Everybody's welcome to an opinion on this one because I've been as surprised by some of the world events as anybody.
So what are the observation, and you may have had some perspective from your perch in Taiwan, Taipei, is that the Chinese economy is not doing well. We know less and less about what's going on because their statistics are becoming more and more opaque, and right when the numbers go bad, the numbers tend to disappear. Let's start with Taiwan. Are they feeling the sort of the cold from China of the economy?
Yes, they are, and that's having a little bit of an impact too. And it partly had an impact on the election. A lot of young people are feeling it's hard to get jobs, it's hard to get apartments, the usual thing. But to some extent, business has picked up with a lot of other countries. Okay. With Taiwan, and as long as the South China Sea is still operable, as long as they can still move the ships around, we're okay. This is why the blockade scenario that China just comes in and forms a blockade around Taiwan is so threatening, right? It's so threatening to Taiwan's well-being, and but there's also another aspect too that I was picking up on, that is, and it may be right, it may be wrong, but a lot of Taiwanese people I respect, people who were in the anti-Ka faction, if you like, with me, and they're some of the most interesting people in Taipei. And their perspective is that, Taiwan's getting untouchable. It's racing ahead. Its economy is racing ahead. The chips, the whole thing, they're racing ahead. They're getting wealthier and wealthier. They're getting better and better at what they do. The Chinese can't catch them. There's the feeling that, the Chinese demographics are disastrous. As you know, Mark, they didn't have when you finally say, okay, let's get rid of these COVID restrictions, you're supposed to get a huge bonus for that, right? You're supposed to get a massive bonus. They did not get it. They got a very small little lift in their economy, and then it washed away. Everybody else got a huge bonus, right? All over Europe, in America, everywhere. So I think that's very important. That's sort of the telltale sign here. And of course, the property market
right
in China is a disaster. And there's no sign that that's lifted or gotten better. That there's no sign of and I think that is one of the reasons why maybe for the first time in a while, the Chinese citizens are kind of looking at Taiwan longingly, thinking, what if we had a vote? What if we could get rid of this leader, and elect some other people? I mean, even if it was Chinese Communist Party, at least we could elect somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. But there's none of that. Okay.
So this is probably another crystal ball question, and obviously dependent on who wins our elections in November. if China were to make a move, assuming they make a move, I guess talk through it from a Biden presidency perspective and a Trump presidency perspective. How involved do we get? Right? Is it another Ukraine situation where we're just throwing money at the problem? Are we boots on the ground? What's happening here?
Well, let's put it this way, because I think Nikki Haley still has a chance here. I don't think this is a foregone conclusion. I mean, let's see what happens in New Hampshire. More to the point, let's see what happens in South Carolina. Okay, to be fair, because she has to win both, otherwise she doesn't go anywhere. Okay, and that's kind of drawing an inside straight. I agree, but my perspective is that both Trump, because he's always been so unpredictable, and Haley, because she's very predictable and hawkish, both of them would ultimately probably get America involved in the war in one way or another. I have a feeling with Trump, it'd be more like there'd be a naval incident. I mean, America gets into most of its wars through a naval incident, right? I mean, this is historically true. Gulf of Tonkin, remember the Maine, Lusitania, whatever. That's how we do it, okay? They fire on us on one of our ships, and then we're in. Right, and it came awfully close to that in Cuban Missile Crisis too. Bottom line here is so I can imagine either president, but Biden is a strange one here too, because he has certain attitudes. He may not have much going on upstairs these days, but certain things really affected him, like Nixon, who was kind of almost an anti-Semite in some respects, or a kind of parlor anti-Semite. Normal within much more normal within the Republican Party at that time. I mean, Golda Meir really had an impact on him. She changed him, okay? And he writes about this. And he clearly, Biden, same thing. Same thing with Biden. Obviously, Golda Meir had an effect on him. And that's why his immediate reaction was to say, okay, we're standing behind Israel and to send 2 carriers over to right off the Lebanon coast and say, don't even think about moving. And it's like the only things that he's got. And so similarly, whenever he's asked a question about Taiwan, you know how he keeps saying, oh yeah, we're in, say that. His handlers go nuts every time.
I know. I was just going to say it, and then frequently they end up trying to walk that back.
Oh,
right. The official Biden administration stance is that they are for Taiwan being a part of China.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, it is actually an articulation of the sort of constructive ambiguity that we've been using for, I guess, now just about 50 years. I assume you're familiar with Susan Shirk's book, Overreach, how I do the full title because it kind of lays out the thesis, but how China derailed its peaceful rise. And to summarize the thesis, it's actually very interesting in her ability to, or her insights about internal Chinese politics. But the thesis, of course, in the title is expressed that these aggressive actions on the part of China, the PRC, has had the effect of creating a coalition around China that is probably more threatened and more wary of China than it was before Xi took power. Looking at other countries, obviously we talked about this a week ago with about India. Is that a fair analysis that perhaps Taiwan has more support now than it might otherwise have had because of countries like Vietnam and Japan and others becoming wary of China's rise?
Well, I guess I'd put it, I think the way you put it, it sort of answers the question. Yeah, that's obviously true, but I would put it a little differently. Every day that I was in Taipei, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd say, is it a good day or a bad day? And the way you knew if it was a good day or a bad day was Ukraine. Whatever was happening in Ukraine told you how you were supposed to feel. And when China would, did these various maneuvers and they got more increasingly aggressive over time, and they were starting, back then. They were already in full swing. The other thing you looked for, and I know this was in the Taiwanese press very openly, was the Japanese defense budget. Every time they surrounded, like a motorcycle gang, they kind of riding around Taiwan, like in a Fellini movie or something. And every time they did that, tick, 0.1% Japanese defense budget would go up immediately. It was almost automatic. So I think that's the most substantial point. That and the fact that if the Russians can't beat the Ukrainians, maybe we have a shot too. Okay. The problem is, and here's where the youth comes in, because the youth is a little more thoughtful about this, but they've kind of been taught by their own military that we can't do it on our own. We can never defend Taiwan on our own. And that is a terrible attitude, quite frankly. And the whole reason why Ukraine, maybe people are getting a bit sick of the Ukrainian war at this point. I understand that. But the most impressive thing was the fact that they were willing to fight, that with their bare hands if necessary, right from the beginning. And it was so different than Afghanistan and so many other countries. And that was always the point. When I would talk to people in Taiwan, they'd say, can you go back and help us lobby the DC? And I'd say, why are you going to lobby DC? The place you should be going to Jerusalem. You should be going to Kiev. Okay, these are where you should be going to learn how these countries defend themselves. Okay, because that's who gets the American support. Okay, that is how it works. And you're not going to get that just by saying we're helpless. Okay. And interestingly enough, the younger the person I talked to, the more they just went, oh, okay, I get it, totally, right? The older person would just be like, there must be a way to do this. Okay.
Right.
But that's a pretty, well, I'll just leave it there. I mean, I think that the other thing is they are acutely aware in Taiwan that China is somewhat on the ropes right now, economically. Now, we don't know. I mean, they may pull back from this, but there's no sign that they're making the right moves. Okay, they're not easing up credit in any way. They can't find a way to do it. They can't get investment. They're blocked on so many areas, right? And Trump started that, really. I mean, this is one of the great achievements of his administration. I admit, I was even quite skeptical it would work, but it did work. Okay, and he sort of said, well, you can win economic wars. I mean, I hated the remark he made after that, where he said, they're easy to win. I was like, well, no, they're not easy to win. But he was actually right, that you can do this, okay? And it is as if we had lost the ability to see that and to do this. And now that is one of the few areas where the Biden administration has followed the Trump line, okay? And it's been very successful. Okay, it's cutting them off from a lot of the. I mean, I wish they'd go a little further with the surveillance. That's my only point. But you look at the Belt and Road Initiative right now, and that has vanished practically, or it has turned into just the Central Asia Initiative at this point, in other terms. But it has not succeeded.
From what I've heard, I mean, it's still a very active component in Africa. That said, the pushback that the Chinese are experiencing from individual countries, because there's not hiring, there's not expenditures, it's all Chinese activity as opposed to using domestic or local suppliers and labor, and that's generating this pushback, which is very consistent with this notion that China has overplayed its hand and is creating sort of more pushback.
Well, I mean, that's right. I mean, it's also true that though the term colonial has developed, the sort of a cult-like status in our universities, especially Harvard and so on, and which is being used constantly against Israel. The truth is the actual imperial systems offered more benefits to places like Africa than the Chinese are. Because if you were, if it was French West Africa, well, you could become French. You could become a French citizen, all right? And if it was a British colony, there were all kinds of ways to rise within that hierarchy, okay? And there was an awful lot of mixing. Yeah, everybody talks about the clubs and all the rest of it, but the truth is, and I've read my Orwell on this, but the truth is there was a lot of mixing of those populations, especially in India. And there was promotion, vast promotion within these cultures. And that does not happen with China. They bring in their own workers. They favor their own workers. And then when the country can't pay the debts anymore because it was never a gift in the first place, they seize a treaty port. And this has happened again and again. And the problem is not so much for the Africans, because the Africans can get out of this, but just the way you said, Mark, they can hold these riots. It's amazing stuff out there on this. I mean, you see, it's almost like science fiction. You see people sort of smashing up these very modern buildings and communication and transportation infrastructures in African countries. That can't happen in Central Asia. And this is why I think that China is sort of pulling back to its redoubt there. So in other words, in Central Asia, they could just demand, you give us some land. You can't pay the debt, give us some of that borderland. And that happened in Tajikistan. I've been to that borderland, okay? And they built a base there. I'm going to go into that in my book. The base that was completely blocked on Google Earth. But the whole thing looks like some sort of, I don't know, Dr. No plan. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable. It's an underground base right on the border. It's clearly, they're clearly looking to take over the biggest supply of yellow cake uranium next, which is only about 5 clicks away from that. This is what's next. They're just waiting to do it without getting into a big conflict with Russia. But they're also pushing Kyrgyzstan, and they are basically, they have signed some horrible deals with Kazakhstan, where they're basically going to be able to take most of the resources of Kazakhstan. And this is where I really fault the administration, okay? Because they've done nothing. They have absolutely done nothing. They just, when Afghanistan went, they just went, we don't want to touch anything in Central Asia. It's like, no, you didn't have to lose Afghanistan, and now you have to regain credibility in this area, because Russia is in the eclipse. They're no longer the influencers in Central Asia. It is a power vacuum. You'd be mad not to act a little bit imperial and go in there and try to at least make some deals at this point. And I do hope that if whether it's Trump or somebody else, that they will do that, because I believe this is of central importance, and it's very important to have that flank against China. I mean, I don't think that's not. Even if we never fight a war with them, you got to have that flank.
I think I'm sorry. I think you were slipping in the fact that you were working on a book. So we've reached that point. I think that's where Jackie.
I had one more question before that, and then I was going for that. Last crystal ball question. China and Taiwan go to war. Who wins?
It's all up to, it is, in this sense, I think Taiwan's right. It's really up to America how that war goes. We all know that if America's willing to put some couple of subs in those straits, they can take out I don't care how big that fleet is, they can take them all out. Okay? It's a question of will, if we're willing to do that. And, the war games that have been played out do have us, having what we would consider unacceptable casualties. But they're actually not. And we are talking about a superpower here. But look, I mean, anybody who, I wouldn't even support somebody who was running for president and didn't wanted a war with China. I mean, what was it? We used to joke about this. What's the 3 most awful words when you put them together in English language? And Asian land war. Okay, it's the worst, right? So I think that's right. The Taiwanese cannot do that. The Taiwanese can ruin everything. They have, what I understand, I haven't actually seen them. I haven't been there with a clipboard looking at this, but they have put demolition in all the chip factories.
Wow.
They will take them out if they have to.
And that would blow up not just the Asia, that would pause the world.
Yeah, it'll pause the world for 10 years.
Wow.
There'll be no progress at all.
So
Okay,
where I
yeah.
was going, you referenced, here you are, Jackie. So you referenced you were working on a book. This is the point of the show where we do ask what you're working on and what can we see of yours in the future?
Well, it's really up to me. I had a lot of PTSD after doing some of this stuff, and I finally got over it in Taiwan, and I really have no excuse now not to be writing full time, but I pretty much have to kick out some stuff over. It should be by next Christmas. I should have a book out. Xinjiang Procedure is the working title. The Xinjiang Procedure. We'll see. But it's going to be a little different than stuff I've written before. It is about organ harvesting. It is. I wanted to call it. I told my agent I want to call this the Slaughter 2. She said that's a stupid title. I said, why not? Hollywood does this all the time. What the hell's wrong with it? It's a great title. She said none of the publishers will like it. So okay, we're probably with the Xinjiang Procedure, and it's going to have, I guess, which is going to make it kind of a little more racy. It has a lot of sort of spy stuff in it, sort of human rights spy stuff.
So what I'm hearing is, I mean, first of all, everyone should put this on their Christmas list early. But second of all, there's this series, I'm not plugging any particular streaming service, but Peacock has a series called Dr. Death. And they've been going, yeah, I know. And I thought it was just going to be based off the first true story, but now there's a second season about a different doctor who's just like killed a bunch of people. So I'm thinking you should sell this story to NBC, right?
No, I don't think so. No, this I do have a very serious point, which has actually come out, and for once, the medical world is finally convinced this is true, which is the big change that happened in our society. Was they were always skeptics. They were always no, the World Health Organization doesn't accept that this organ harvesting is happening and so forth.
Yeah.
And
good to
now,
get
well, what changed it is not that our evidence is so great. What changed it really is COVID, because the doctors had the worst time of it. Can you imagine what it was like being a doctor while the COVID thing was going on, and your patients dissing you and saying you're trying to kill me, and all that stuff, and they had to go along with the World Health Organization, who was basically Beijing's chimp monkey. I mean, this was ridiculous. Okay, it was a travesty for everybody involved, and they had to go along with Fauci. I mean, my God, look at him now. Okay, so I don't take credit, but I do say that I had something to say, and which I now have to prove in the book in some detail, some granular detail, is that I said, look, about 35,000 Uyghurs are being killed for their organs every year. Now, everybody loves to use this term genocide about the Uyghurs, okay? Oh, it's a genocide. It's a genocide. And, Israel, Israel hits a schoolhouse that even doesn't have anybody in it. That's a genocide too. And the term has been completely devalued. Organ harvesting, 28-year-old males and females, that is genocide, okay, on that level. If you're talking about over 10,000 people, let's just say, that's an arbitrary number, but when you start talking about 10,000, 20,000, we're in a kind of a genocidal state, or at least mass murder, okay? And this has been going on this entire time for about 5 years. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
We're starting to look at 500,000 here. Okay, this is not a small number. There are only 13 to 15 million Uyghurs in that country. They're not a big people. You can't afford to lose 500,000. It's not. These are the most vital. That's the most vital age of your lifetime. I mean, it's the most important age. You're at the peak of your beginning the peak of your intellectual capacity, and you're definitely at the peak of your health. Your health.
Getting out of that is I'm about to peak, guys. I'm 26, turning 27 this year.
Trust me. Okay, well, trust me and Mark. Okay.
Yeah, we're long.
It was great.
Ethan and I are long past our peaks, right?
Yeah, 28 was boy. Those were good days, man. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Ethan, we're definitely gonna have you back on. I'm sure we'll have you on several times between now and then, but definitely when the book is out to talk about that, and when you sell the rights to NBC and your show comes out.
I don't think anything like that's going to happen, and hopefully I can kind of, whatever. But no, what I'd like to do, I mean, the future, what I'd like to do is I like doing this kind of work. I like getting out there, going to the real countries, and we're not there to set a bomb. We're not there to, not there to kill anyone or anything like that. Nothing like that's going on. But you're just there to gather information, human rights information, and talk to witnesses. But I find that kind of work so compelling. Okay. And once it gets in your blood, it doesn't leave. And I have a nice little team now of different kinds of people who've all done it. They're sort of veterans of it. And, I'd love to do that. And I'd like to figure out a way to do that without having Uncle Sam looking over our shoulder at all times.
Well, when you find the key to that, let us know.
Yeah, okay, well, actually I won't. I'll keep it secret.
Right. We will be back next week with another guest. And Mark, thank you as always for hosting. Ethan, thank you so much for an amazing, enlightening conversation. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll talk to you next week.
Great.